Part 2. 5 years, 2 kids, and 0 remaining brain cells. Kong Dohan had survived rogue wolf attacks, 3 attempted coups against the Pack Council, and 1 extremely ill-advised arm wrestling match with a grizzly bear shifter at a Interpack summit in Busan. None of that had prepared him for a 4-year-old who had learned the word negotiate. "Miho," Dohan said, crouching down to his son's eye level in the kitchen, while simultaneously catching a ceramic mug that was falling off the counter because his reflexes were the only thing still functioning at full capacity. "We talked about this. 2 cookies. We agreed." Miho Kong, age 4, who had inherited his father's broad shoulders in miniature, his Omega parents' devastating honeygold eyes at full power, and apparently the negotiating instincts of a particularly ruthless labor union representative, crossed his tiny arms. "That was before," Miho said. "Before what?" "Before I got hungrier." Dohan stared at his son. His son stared back. Neither blinked. This had been going on for 45 seconds. Dohan was the head of the Kong Pack security forces. He had outstared international threats. He had outstared Elder Kong at Sunday dinner, which was basically outstaring death itself. He was losing to a 4-year-old. "You had breakfast an hour ago," Dohan said. "I'm a growing alpha," Miho said, with the gravity of a tiny man who had heard this phrase used to justify something once and filed it away for future deployment. "You're 4. A very big 4. From the living room came a suspicious thudding noise followed by the particular silence that meant someone was doing something they absolutely should not be doing. Dohan straightened up, crossed to the doorway, and found his 2-year-old daughter Sarah attempting to scale the bookshelf using her father's academic texts as footholds. She had made it to the 3rd shelf. She was using Ihan's published dissertation as a stepping stone. She looked thrilled. "Sarah." "Hi, Daddy." She waved cheerfully from her altitude of approximately 4 feet. "Come down, please." "No, thank you. That wasn't a question." "Oh." She considered this. "Still no." Dohan crossed the room in 3 strides, plucked his daughter off the bookshelf like she was a small, extremely dangerous fruit, and held her upside down under one arm because it was the only hold that reliably stopped her from immediately climbing something else. Sarah shrieked with delight. Ihan's dissertation fell to the floor with a thump that sounded expensive. "Airplane," Sarah announced. "You're not an airplane. I'm the best airplane." Dohan walked back to the kitchen with his inverted toddler, arriving in time to find Miho standing on his tiptoes, hand deep in the cookie jar, wearing the expression of a man caught red-handed who was already formulating his defense. They stared at each other. "This isn't what it looks like," Miho said. "You have a cookie in each hand." "I was counting them." Miho held them up. 1, 2. "See? Quality control." Dohan pointed at the jar. "Put one back." "But Daddy." "Miho." "But." "Miho. What if I put the cookie back?" There was a long, tragic pause. Miho put one cookie back with the reverence of someone burying a beloved pet. He looked up at his father with eyes that could have dissolved concrete. "You're very strict," Miho announced. "Thank you. It wasn't a compliment." "I know." Dohan ruffled his son's hair with his free hand. "Eat your cookie at the table." "Okay, but I want you to know I'm unhappy about this." "Noted." "Table." Miho trudged to the table with the gait of someone walking to the guillotine. He climbed into his chair, arranged himself with great dignity, and began eating his single cookie while staring at the cookie jar with the focus of someone who had not given up, merely retreated to reassess strategy. Dohan deposited Sarah right side up in her high chair. She immediately grabbed his face with both hands. "Daddy has a nice face," she declared. Dohan's entire heart melted into a warm puddle. "Thank you, baby. Like a cookie. Is that a good thing?" "Cookies are the best thing," Sarah said, with the conviction of a religious convert. "Then I'll take it." The back door opened and Ihan walked in carrying a bag of groceries, his university lanyard still around his neck, reading glasses pushed up on his head, wearing the expression of a man who had spent 3 hours in a departmental meeting about citation standards and had survived but only barely. He was also, objectively, still the most beautiful person Dohan had ever seen in his entire life, which was incredibly inconvenient because after 5 years of marriage Dohan felt he should have developed at least some immunity and had developed precisely none. The Departmental Review Board, Ihan announced, setting down the groceries, can collectively go take a long walk off a short pier. Bad meeting? Dohan asked. Professor Huang said my latest paper's conclusion was, perhaps a bit passionate. Ihan's eye twitched. My conclusion was 3 pages of meticulously sourced academic argument. You did end it with, and anyone who disagrees is simply wrong. That's not passionate. That's confident. You cited yourself as a source. I'm an expert in my own field, Dohan. Miho looked up from his cookie. Papa is scary when he talks about work. Papa is passionate, Dohan said diplomatically. Papa is right, Ihan corrected, kissing Miho on top of his head and then Sarah on both cheeks. He got to Dohan last, which was a whole thing that Dohan absolutely was not going to bring up because Ihan would call it territorial and Dohan's wolf would be smug about it for a week. He kissed Dohan briefly on the mouth and then immediately pulled back and looked at him with narrowed eyes. You gave Sarah cookies before lunch again. I gave Miho cookies before lunch. Sarah's had nothing yet. Cookie! Sarah shouted, with the urgency of someone who had just discovered a cause worth fighting for. See what you've done, Ihan said. She was on the bookshelf, Dohan said. I had to bribe her down. You're supposed to use stern words, not bribery. Stern words didn't work. She's 2. She doesn't care about stern words. She told me no thank you and kept climbing. Ihan looked at their daughter. Sarah looked back with enormous honey-gold eyes that were basically exact copies of Ihan's, which Dohan privately felt was deeply unfair because it meant Ihan couldn't even use the disappointed parent expression without seeing himself in miniature. She has your eyes, Dohan said, not for the first time. She has your complete disregard for personal safety, Yuhan said, also not for the first time. Cookie, Sarah said again, in case they had forgotten. After lunch, Ihan told her firmly. Sarah considered this. Okay, she said, in the tone of someone accepting a ceasefire, not a defeat. The real trouble started at Sunday dinner. It started, as most of the real trouble in Dohan's life did, with Park Yung. Park Yung arrived at Grandmother Kong's house 20 minutes late, wearing a blazer that cost more than most people's monthly rent, carrying a bottle of wine, and wearing the expression of a man who knew he was about to cause a scene and was mentally preparing his defense. He was too late. He'd already caused the scene. He just didn't know Dohan knew yet. You told my 4-year-old, Dohan said, cutting Yung off before he could even sit down, about the ugly Omega incident. The table went quiet with the particular quality of quiet that meant everyone had heard and everyone was paying very close attention while pretending to examine their soup. Jung's expression flickered through approximately 6 emotions in 2 seconds. They were surprise, guilt, attempted innocence, the realization that attempted innocence wasn't going to work, acceptance of his fate, and finally the reckless confidence of a man who had decided to commit to the bit. In my defense, Jung said, sitting down and unfolding his napkin with the composure of a diplomat. He asked me a question and I answered it. He's 4, Ihan said, with the carefully controlled energy of someone who had been looking forward to this confrontation all week. Children deserve honest answers, Jung said. Children deserve age-appropriate honest answers, Ihan said. Not detailed accounts of how their father walked into a sacred mating ceremony with a plan to request an ugly Omega. The words ugly Omega landed on the dinner table like a bomb. Aish, he didn't, Aunt Myri said. He did, said Jung. We know he did, said Uncle Tamin. We just try not to discuss it at family gatherings. Why not? Cousin Yuna asked. It's the best family story we have. We have other family stories, Dohan said. None of them are as good, Yuna said. The one where you tried to pick an ugly Omega and grandmother gave you the most beautiful Omega in the pack is genuinely the best love story I've ever heard, and I've read 300 romance novels. I'm sitting right here, Ihan said. You're part of why it's a good story, Yuna said. You're the most beautiful Omega in the pack. Ihan's blush made a full nuclear appearance. He pointed at Yuna. Don't. I'm complimenting you. compliment me by not discussing my husband's terrible plan at the dinner table. I just want to know, Miho said from his chair, with the careful enunciation of a child who had been waiting for the right moment to deploy information. What is cosmically screwed? The silence that followed was so total that Dohan could hear the wind outside, the ticking of Grandmother Kong's antique clock, and the sound of Jung's survival instincts failing to kick in. Every adult at the table turned to look at Jung. Jung examined his soup very carefully. Uncle Jung said that when Daddy saw Papa, Miho continued, happily oblivious to the destruction he was causing. His brain stopped and he was cosmically screwed. What does screwed mean? Is it like a screw? Like a building thing? Yes, Dohan said immediately. Exactly like that. A building thing. Uncle Jung was talking about construction, Ihan added, with the smoothness of a man who had been managing their son's questions about inappropriate things for 4 years. Oh, Miho considered this. Uncle Jung knows about construction? Uncle Jung, Grandmother Kong said, setting down her chopsticks with a precision that made Jung visibly flinch, knows about many things, including, apparently, how to teach 4-year-olds things they should not yet know. Jung Yes, Grandmother Kong, Jung said, with the meekness of a man facing a very small, very terrifying tribunal. Why did you tell my great-grandson about the mating ceremony? He asked why his daddy always smells like honey when he looks at his papa. Jung said, and despite everything, his voice had gone soft. It was actually really sweet. He said, Uncle Jung, why does Daddy get a happy face when Papa comes in the room? And I said it was because of the scent bond. And he asked how the scent bond happened. And I may have provided context. The table was quiet again. Cosmically screwed context, Ihan said flatly. I edited heavily. Jung protested. I left out at least 40% of the embarrassing parts. Which parts did you keep? Dohan demanded. Just the broad strokes. Alpha goes to ceremony, has terrible plan fails spectacularly, falls in love. Classic narrative arc. And the ugly Omega part? That's load-bearing to the plot, Dohan. You can't remove it without the whole structure collapsing. Grandmother Kong made a sound that was definitely not a laugh. She covered it with her teacup. Her shoulders were shaking suspiciously. Grandmother? Dohan said, appalled. Are you laughing? I'm coughing, she said. You're not coughing. I'm coughing with my whole body because I'm old and that's how old people cough. She set down her teacup and looked at Dohan with eyes that were absolutely sparkling. My darling idiot grandson-in-law. Even your children know the story of how you walked into a sacred ceremony and asked me for an ugly Omega. Grandmother, I gave you the most beautiful, most brilliant Omega in 6 packs, she continued, with the satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting 5 years to say this at a dinner table. And your response was, you're not supposed to be this pretty. That's what he said? Cousin Yuna shrieked. To his face, Aunt Myri said. Within 30 seconds of meeting him? Uncle Taemin added. In front of witnesses? Another cousin Dohan couldn't name at this precise moment of social catastrophe added from further down the table. In front of the ceremonial officiant, Ihan confirmed, with the serenity of a man who had processed this humiliation years ago and was now able to mine it for entertainment. Who was taking official notes? She put it in the ceremony record, Dohan said, because apparently he had to keep suffering. I checked. There's an official pact document that says Alpha Kong expressed surprise at Omega Saiyahan's appearance, specifically noting he was not supposed to be this pretty. Ceremony proceeded. The table absolutely lost it. Even Ihan was laughing, the bright surprised laugh that still made Dohan's chest ache with how much he loved this person, and he'd been the victim of the whole thing. Even Grandmother Kong was laughing, abandoning all pretense of the cough. Even Miho was laughing because everyone else was, even though he definitely didn't understand why. Sarah, who had been systematically taking apart a bread roll for the past 5 minutes, looked up and decided she should also be laughing, so she laughed too. Dohan looked around the table at his completely out-of-control family, his husband wiping actual tears from his eyes, his children laughing at a joke they didn't understand, his grandmother giggling like a girl, and Jung, his supposed best friend, already composing what appeared to be a text that would probably be sent to approximately everyone they knew. "I hate all of you," Do-han announced. "No you don't," Ihan said, still laughing. "I don't," Do-han agreed. "But I want the record to show that I hate all of you." "Noted," said Grandmother Kong, adjusting her glasses. "Now eat your dinner. You need your strength. You have 2 children who inherited your persistence and my grandson's brain. You're going to need everything you have." She said the last part with such genuine, loving satisfaction that Do-han couldn't even argue. He ate his dinner. He did not stop being laughed at for the rest of the meal. Bedtime in the Kong household was classified, in Do-han's private threat assessment system, as a level 3 situation. Not quite critical, but certainly requiring strategic planning, emotional fortitude, and the willingness to read the same picture book 4 times in different character voices. Tonight had involved 2 stories, one of which Do-han had to do in what Miho demanded was the scary voice, and one in the funny voice. And when Do-han pointed out that those were the same story just read differently, Miho had looked at him with the withering disappointment of a critic. 3 glasses of water. 3. For one small child. Sarah requiring all 4 of her stuffed animals to be arranged in a specific formation that she could only communicate through pointing and increasingly urgent noises. A 15-minute discussion about whether dragons were real, which ended in a diplomatic stalemate where Do-han agreed they might theoretically exist in dimensions adjacent to this one, and Miho agreed to go to sleep on the condition that they discuss getting one, if such a dimension was ever confirmed. And one last hug from each child, which was fine and normal, except that Miho kept resetting the hug count every time he let go, so technically it was one continuous hug that lasted 11 minutes. Do-han closed the last door, walked to the bedroom, and folded himself face first onto the bed like a building being demolished. "I'm dead," he announced into the pillow. "Please inform the Pack Council. Tell them I died as I lived." Valiantly and confused. "You read picture books?" Ihan said from the bathroom, where the sound of running water suggested he was washing his face with the efficiency of someone who had also been absolutely demolished by the day but was not willing to show it. "Long picture books. They're picture books. They're 30 pages maximum. Long, emotionally complex picture books about a small bear who just wants to be understood." Do-han turned his face sideways. "Also, Miho made me do the scary voice and the funny voice for the same book, which is a directorial choice I respect but found exhausting." Ihan came out of the bathroom in the soft gray pajamas. The devastatingly comfortable-looking ones that had been making Do-han lose track of conversations for 5 years. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his husband with the expression he used when he was trying to appear stern and was also actively failing. "You gave the dragon dimension an opening," Ihan said. "What was I supposed to do?" he asked directly. "I can't lie to him directly. You could have said dragons don't exist. What if they do? I'm not going to be the father who crushed my son's belief in adjacent dimensional cryptozoology, and then it turns out I was wrong." Ihan stared at him. "Adjacent dimensional cryptozoology. It's a legitimate field. It is genuinely not. Tell that to the dimension where the dragons are." Ihan pressed his lips together. The lip pressing was what he did right before he laughed and didn't want to give Do-han the satisfaction. Do-han had catalogued this expression approximately 10,000 times and never got tired of it. "You," Ihan said carefully, "are going to give our son an extremely complicated relationship with the scientific method." "I'm going to give our son intellectual flexibility," Do-han corrected. "That's what your dissertation called it when Pack communities adapted to evidence. Intellectual flexibility. I wrote that in a completely different context. Context is flexible. That's not what context means. Intellectually flexible context." Han threw a pillow at him. Do-han caught it without looking up because his reflexes were, as previously noted, the only thing still operating at full capacity. They settled into the comfortable quiet that 5 years of marriage had built between them, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled because it was already full. Ihan pulled out the book he'd been reading, something dense with footnotes that Do-han had tried to read once and had gotten 3 pages into before his brain filed a formal objection. Do-han stared at the ceiling with the contentment of a man who had exactly what he wanted and knew it. "Hey," Do-han said. I was thinking about what Jung said, the thing he told Miho, about my brain stopping when I saw you. Ihan turned a page. What about it? It still does that. Ihan's page-turning stopped. My brain, Dohan continued, addressing the ceiling with great sincerity, still stops when you walk into a room. It has been doing this for 5 years and 3 months, and I have not found a solution. I've tried everything. Breathing exercises. Thinking about logistics. One time I tried to mentally recite the pack security protocols while you were talking, and I missed an entire sentence you said because I was watching your hands. What did I say? Something about funding. I had to ask Jung later. I told Jung my research funding had been approved before I told you. Because you said it and I wasn't listening because I was watching your hands. They were doing the thing where they move when you talk about research. The thing where they move, Ihan repeated slowly. You weren't listening to my words. You were watching my hands move. In my defense, they're very nice hands. Dohan. Also, you were smiling the excited smile. The one you do when something works out. Where your eyes do the thing. The thing. The crinkling thing. Where they go all. Dohan made a gesture at his own face that communicated nothing but apparently communicated enough because Ihan's expression had gone from flat to something much softer without his apparent permission. You're ridiculous, Ihan said. I'm in love, Dohan said. Same thing. Ihan closed his book. He set it on the nightstand with the careful precision of a man managing his own emotions, which Dohan recognized because Ihan had been managing his emotions with careful precision since approximately 30 seconds after they met. He turned to look at Dohan with those honey-gold eyes that had shorted out every functional brain cell Dohan possessed 5 years ago in a candlelit ceremony hall and had not stopped doing so since. I still can't believe, Ihan said slowly, that the great love of my life started with you asking your grandmother for an ugly omega. Reformed idiot, Dohan said. We've established. No, listen. Ihan shifted to face him fully. I've been thinking about what Miho said. About your happy face when I come in the room. He paused. He sees that. Baby, the entire pack sees that. Jung has been using it as evidence in arguments since approximately month 2. Evidence of what? That I was cosmically screwed. The moment I took that blindfold off. Dohan smiled at the ceiling. He's not wrong. I am, extremely, completely, permanently cosmically screwed. Han was quiet for a moment. I told Mjun, he said finally. The night of the ceremony. When I was on the phone and you were pretending not to listen from the couch. I wasn't pretending not to listen. You were 100% listening and we both know it. But Ihan was smiling. I told him your scent was cedar and dark chocolate and something warm. And that it was the worst possible thing to happen to my carefully constructed independent lifestyle. That's so romantic, Dohan said solemnly. Shut up. I'm being sincere. I'm also being sincere. That is romantic. Your version of falling in love is calling it the worst possible thing. It was inconvenient. I'm telling Miho this story when he's old enough. You'll do no such. Uncle Jung already told him the beginning. I'm providing the sequel. Balance. Ihan grabbed the second pillow and deployed it with precision. Dohan caught it, also without looking, and tucked it behind his head. I love you, Dohan said, to the ceiling, to the room, to the warm, quiet house where his children were sleeping and the bond between them hummed steady as a heartbeat. You know that, right? Not because of the bond. Not because of biology. Because you're the most extraordinary, impossible, brilliant, terrifying person I've ever met, and every day I think I can't possibly love you more than this, and then you call a colleague's academic position factually illiterate in a peer review and I fall down the whole stairs again. Silence. Then, you read my peer reviews? Jung sends them to me. He thinks they're art. Jung sends you. Ihan stopped. Restarted. I'm going to address the Jung situation separately. Currently I'm addressing the fact that you've just said something extremely sincere and embarrassing, and I'm trying to decide how to respond without crying because I have a reputation. You can cry, Dohan said gently. I won't tell anyone. You'll tell Jung. I'll tell Jung you had something in your eye. He won't believe that. He'll pretend to believe it because he actually loves you and would never make you feel embarrassed about having feelings. Another silence. Softer this time. I love you, Ihan said quietly, like it was still a slightly astonishing thing to say after 5 years and 2 kids and Sunday dinners and pile of academic papers and a shared life that had been built from an absolute disaster of a beginning. You know that, right? Not because you make coffee exactly right and always catch the children before they fall off things and read picture books in different voices and look at me like I'm... He stopped. Like you're what? Dohan asked, turning his head to look at him. Ihan met his eyes. Like you still can't believe you got this lucky. I can't, Dohan said simply. Every single day I can't. Ihan's blush arrived, predictable as sunrise, devastating as always. You asked for an ugly omega, he said, in the voice of someone who had made peace with something that had once been mortifying and was now just theirs. And I got you, Dohan said. Which makes me either the luckiest idiot alive or the universe has a deeply specific sense of humor. Both, Ihan said. Obviously both. He closed the distance between them, settled into the space that 5 years had perfectly shaped to fit them both, and the bond between them hummed with the warmth of everything they'd built. Outside, the pack compound was quiet. In the next room, Miho slept with his arms flung wide in the boneless abandon of small children. In the room after, Sarah was curled around all 4 stuffed animals with the proprietary grip of someone who protected what was hers. Dohan lay in the dark and thought about a terrified alpha in a blindfold who'd had the worst plan in recorded history, and the beautiful omega who'd called him a walnut, and the grandmother who had known exactly what she was doing. Hey, he said. Ihan said, already half asleep against his shoulder. I'm glad my plan failed. Your plan was catastrophic. It really was. It was embarrassing for everyone involved. Deeply. It's in official pack records. I know. Our son thinks it's a construction metaphor. For now. Ihan laughed softly against his shoulder, warm and tired and real. Go to sleep, he said. Miho is going to be up at 6 demanding to discuss the dragon situation, and you're going to need your strength. What's our position on the dragon situation? Our position is that dragons are mythological, and your position is apparently that they might exist in adjacent dimensions, and between the two of us our son is going to grow up either a brilliant scientist or a cryptozoologist, and honestly I've made peace with both. Dohan pressed a kiss to the top of Ihan's head. I love you. I love you too, Ihan said, which he still said like it was a fact he was presenting rather than a feeling he was sharing, which was very him and which Dohan found completely devastating every time. Even though you told our son dragons might exist in adjacent dimensions. In my defense. Sleep, Dohan. Dohan slept. At 6:14 a.m., Miho woke up and immediately requested a full briefing on the dragon situation. This was parenthood. Neither of them would have changed a single thing. Epilogue. The framed certificate. On the wall of Grandmother Kong's study, between her 40 years of matchmaking certificates and a photograph of her standing on the summit of a mountain she had climbed at age 72 just to prove she could, there hung a framed newspaper clipping. Formal public apology. From Kong Dohan, head of Kong Pack Security. To all Omegas everywhere past, present, and future. I would like to formally and publicly apologize for the events of 5 years ago in which I, a fully grown adult alpha who absolutely should have known better, asked the pack's chief matchmaker, my own grandmother, to pair me with a, quote, Omega who would not distract me with their appearance. This was wrong. It was foolish. It demonstrated a catastrophic misunderstanding of basic biology, a disrespectful attitude toward the Omega community, and a level of personal idiocy that I struggle to fully comprehend even in retrospect. I am happy to report that the universe, in its infinite and specific sense of humor, responded to this request by pairing me with Dr. Saihan Kong, who is brilliant, terrifying, correct about almost everything, and by any possible measure the most beautiful person I have ever seen in my life. I would apologize further, but he has read this apology and made 17 edits, and I have agreed to all of them. Learn from my mistakes. Regards, Kong Dohan, reformed idiot, work in progress. In the margin, in small neat handwriting that belonged to Ihan, someone had added, He held the book upside down for 20 minutes before he noticed. He is still, in many ways, an absolute disaster. He is also, in every way that matters, exactly what I wanted. I just didn't know I wanted it yet. Dr. Saihen Kong, who told his grandmother he'd rather date a deep-sea octopus than an alpha, and stands by the sentiment as a matter of principle while acknowledging the outcome was acceptable. Grandmother Kong read both notes every morning while she had her tea. Every morning, she smiled the smile of a woman who had arranged 313 successful matings and knew, with the certainty of 40 years' experience, that the universe always gave you exactly what you needed, even when you asked for something else entirely. Especially then. The end. Miho never got a dragon. He did eventually find a very large lizard in the garden that he named Dragon Kong 2 and kept as a pet for 6 years. Ihan maintained it was a skink. Dohan supported his son.